This is the 27th of May 2022 and I'm with Paddy Scully in Wood Village. Evelyn Stevens is my name, and we're going to talk about all the things that Paddy remembers about the names of places and Boreens and fields, etc., and other things about the village. So would we start with maybe just describe the village? How many houses was there in it, roughly?
Well, in my there was 14, but I'd say there was many more before the famine.
Yeah.
This village one time was, but it was in with Baile, so it was between Woodpark and Baile, which was under Baile.
Okay.
And there was a big population in Baile at the time, and there was very few in Woodpark. But as time went on, there was a bigger population in Woodpark and less in Baile.
Right.
But I think it was the same. It was classed as the same village going back.
All right. Now I call it Wood Village, but you call it Woodpark.
Woodpark. There's no real title for Wood Village. It doesn't exist in any record or anything.
Okay.
But it was Woodpark House, and I think the landlord at the time preferred that the tenants, their village would be known as Wood Village, and he was Woodpark. But there's no record of that, I think, going back.
Right, right. And what do you prefer to call it yourself?
Well, it's Woodpark, because that's the official title. If I was to apply for anything,
yeah.
Wood Village doesn't exist.
All right, okay.
So it's just Woodpark.
And how many of the houses were thatched at the time when you were young?
Oh, when I was young, they were all thatched, but bar one, I think. I think there was only one slate house.
Right.
And that had been re-roofed.
Oh, it was the old house, but it had been re-roofed.
Yes. And then there's a few bungalows were built, I think, towards the mid to late 50s, 1950s, I think.
So were the thatched houses then, were the rest of the thatched houses knocked down? Because I don't see any trace of them.
No, they were all knocked with, say, the Gaeltacht. This was the Gaeltacht area, and the Gaeltacht give grants to build new houses. So they got grants, and the old ones were demolished. Right. There's one still, as we call it, in the hill. It's bound to Farrers, but it's re-roofed. There's tiles on it now.
Okay.
But that's the last of the original thatched houses.
Right. And would there be many outhouses with each house?
Oh, there was. Well, as time went on, there would be a cart house, as they used to call them, a cow house, a hen house, and a piggery. They were the main ones. Right. Some had a barn and that later on. But
right. And what was the barn used for?
For storing grain and fodder and different things like that.
Yeah. And were they all knocked as well?
Yeah, they would. Well, some of them were re-roofed, and most of them, when they built a new house, they built new sheds as well. Because it was too expensive and they were too hard to maintain.
Okay, yeah.
Yes,
okay. So I think you described to me before, Paddy, about the fact that the land was very rocky. It was
all rocky. It was either rocky or boggy. When you crossed the road, it was all rock on the one side, and then it went on to the bog. So there was just scattered few little gardens, very little.
Yeah. And what was the rocks were called?
The Craigenny.
Yeah. And the Portach.
The Portach was the bog, the other side, yes.
Yeah. And used to save turf in the bog?
Oh, they used, there was, when I was young, there was a few people couldn't turf that time. But then it began to get cut away, so they got bog on the Coille line later on.
Oh, right, yeah. What about, where did people grow their vegetables or what?
Well, there was all little gardens around the house. They had little small gardens and paddocks and that around the house. And they sowed the early crops, the early spuds and vegetables there, that supplied them for part of the year. And then the main crops supplied the rest of the year.
And were there Irish words for, say, you talked about those gardens around the houses? Was there Gary. And the vegetables, were they called Irish words or?
Well, blastry for vegetables.
Yeah, fatty.
Fatty were the potatoes,
Yeah. So that just brings us to the language. Was there much Irish spoken? You said it was the Gaeltacht.
Oh, there was, yeah. It was all Irish at one stage, I'd say, going back, just before my time a bit. I think everybody spoke Irish.
And could your mother and father speak Irish?
Oh, they were fluent Irish speakers. Yeah.
Right, okay. So, one of the things we're interested in is the Irish, the place names, and they're all in Irish, of course. So, I'd like for you to list as many as you can remember of the Boreens, fields, anything.
Yes, there was all little Boreens going back just about my time. I just saw the end of them really, before the bulldozer came and that. So they had a lot of little gardens here and there, like there was fertile.
Yeah.
And they planted those. And then they had maybe the cow and a few calves and the rough pasture that was there, the bit that was there.
Okay.
And there was a Boreen leading through all those gardens, like.
Right,
So
right.
Boreen. The one beside me here, another called Boreen Gortnua.
Okay.
That was the name that was always in that. And the gardens over the end of the word, the Gortnuas.
Right.
Yeah. Then the next one here was Boreen Gortnacra. The field, there must be about an acre in those fields that it led into, like.
Yeah.
And the one across the way then was Boreen Namali. I presume there was a lot of old walls or whatever there, like.
Yeah.
And that led to a place which I think there was houses there one time. Knockan na Dáliúra they called it. So I'd say there was houses there at one stage. There seemed to be like remnants of them before the bulldozer came. I just remember about that much. Then we had Boreen na Tubber the other side of me, which led to the well. And Park, and Gary Tubber and Park at Tubber were the little gardens beside that, like.
Right, right.
And the other end of it then was just Boreen na Porto, who led to the bog.
Okay.
And then you had, on the other side, and just back a little further, there was another road that led into the bog, Boreen na Porto Ella.
Okay.
And there was a one at an angle to it, they called it Boreen Garin na Mucka, which led into gardens, and they called them Garin na Mucka, presuming that they kept pigs there back in the time, like.
Right. Interesting, yeah.
So they're mostly the ones that were here in this village now, because when the bulldozer came then, they didn't need a lot of those little Boreens because they were inaccessible with the machinery they had and that. So the Land Commission, when they divided the land, they put a lot of the gardens together, like. So they had little plots of land so they could access them from the road and that.
Oh, I see.
So they can get in now with bigger machinery and that.
Okay. And when would that have been done?
The Land Commission were here in the 1950s, and I think the bulldozer came in about the mid-60s. So it changed the entire face of the village.
Wow.
Like.
In the mid-60s?
The mid-60s,
So you saw all that?
Oh, I spent most of my early life picking stones. That was them going target picking the stones. They got a grant for reclaiming them, like. So you had to have all the stones picked up before you got the grant, like.
Oh, I see.
So mostly, sometimes the bulldozer man wasn't paid until all the stones were picked and the grant was got, and then they paid the bulldozer.
So explain that to me, Paddy. Where were the stones?
When the bulldozer, he pushed all the rock ahead and all that, but he left all the small ones behind because he just had a big scoop in the front. So he just pushed the rock ahead and he piled it up in what we call dumps still, like there were big piles of rock. And they're still here around, like in most of the fields.
Right.
In any corner or low area, you just pushed the rock and the bushes in there.
Right.
And then you picked up all the loose stones after that and
where did you put them?
With grass seed. Well, you throw them, most people faced the dumps with them so the cattle couldn't climb up on them and that.
Right. Gosh, yeah.
That's the way it was that time.
Wow. So was the bulldozer a private enterprise or was that?
It was a private enterprise, yeah. But I suppose there was so much work in the area. When he came here, he stayed around a lot because people availed of the grants that time, and they needed the land. Like.
Oh, so that's how people could pay him. They got a grant.
Exactly, they got a grant. Yeah.
Right.
You only got the grant when you had all the stones picked and the grass seed sowed.
Right. Wow.
So an inspector called and he inspected the job, and if he was satisfied, well then you got your grant.
And that was a government.
It was a government initiative, yes.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't. That's very interesting. Yeah. So you've seen really, really big changes.
Huge changes.
Oh.
Huge, because that was before we joined the common market or anything. So there wasn't a lot happening that time.
Yeah.
And they had only owned the land for about 100 years, less than 100 years at the time. Because up to that they were only renting.
Yeah, from the landlord.
So the landlord, yes.
Yeah, yeah. And when people got those new fields then, when the Creigana,
Yeah, Creigana, yeah.
when they were cleared, did it make a big difference?
Oh, a huge difference altogether, huge difference. They were ideal in the winter, like for all fodder, but in the summer they got very dry because the land was very light, so they burned up quite easily.
Right.
Plus the fact before the water came, I suppose they had to take the cattle away out in the summer to get water, like there was no water.
Okay.
But when the piped water came in about the mid-70s, they had water and all those, so they were ideal. And I think a lot of the summers got a bit wetter as well, so they were ideal.
Oh, oh. So when you were younger then, before the bulldozer came, what was done here in Fair? So you said you explained.
When I was about 10, I'd say, when it came. Yeah.
So you had the little gardens, the garry around the houses, the little gardens, and then you had these other fields that were full of rocks and some soil,
exactly,
some little patches.
Exactly.
So what kind of farming did people do?
Well, it was all tillage nearly. They had very few cow and a few calves maybe, but very little animals. Mostly all tillage.
Mostly all tillage.
Potatoes. The beet was the big thing when it came.
Ah, yeah.
The beet, I think, started in the 50s sometime, and everybody sowed an acre of beet or so that time, because it's the only crop that they could get money out of.
Right.
Because up till that, they only lived on mostly selling eggs and pigs. Pigs was a big thing as well at the time.
Right. So people had pigs.
People at every house, I think, had pigs back.
Right.
And
hens, I suppose.
when they sold, they had all had hens. When they sold the pigs, maybe every about 3 months, it was money coming in. And so every week as well, when they went to the travelling shop, when they brought the eggs along, it was like bartering really. They had brought the eggs along and they got their few, which was very few at the time.
Yeah.
Groceries, sugar and tea and flour maybe, very few other things.
Yeah.
But they didn't have to part with any money. It's very little anyway.
Yeah.
But when the beet came in, at least they got their check every year.
Yeah.
And it usually came around the Christmas.
Oh yeah, that was great.
So it was a great, yeah. And
so they were using the bit of land that was there, the good patches, that was where the beet was.
Well, you see around here now at that time, you see when the Land Commission came in about the mid-1950s, they got new land in Rinray. So that helped them an awful lot. They could, there was fairly good tillage land.
Oh,
so usually they sowed the beet there and that.
Oh, I see.
So
I see what you mean.
Like every one of them got land there.
Oh,
so it belonged to the Blakes.
Oh, right, okay. So while the land around the village here itself wasn't good, you had
it was sustained themselves, but they wouldn't be able to grow much beet or anything in it, but they didn't have enough of it anyway.
Right,
yeah. Because the land that was reclaimed with the bulldozer, you couldn't sow crops in it or anything. It was just for grazing.
Why couldn't you grow crops?
Because there was no soil, very little soil.
Oh, okay.
Anywhere those craggy rocks were, there was very little soil.
And it's still the same today?
It's still the same today, and if you got dry summers now as well, it would just burn up, turn yellow like.
Right.
But wet years, they were great.
Right, okay.
They were great one time for when they did have the cattle or the stock, because they could keep them out for the winter like. They didn't have to stay with them because it was good dry land, so the cattle were fine.
Yeah.
They had shelter from the boundaries around the wall, the bushes and that.
Right, yeah.
But
yeah, interesting. Yeah. Now you mentioned to me before, but you haven't mentioned them yet, the goats.
Oh, the goats, yeah, because there was so much scrub land around us, rocks and that, everybody had goats. There was goats all over the place, and they kept the place, the briars and that trimmed. So they were a great asset at the time.
Yeah.
But they had their own issues as well, you see. They would eat anything. So they would get into those cabbage gardens and other gardens. So what they used to do, the way they did it, they tied two of them together with a Coille, as they call them. So when the two were together, they couldn't travel much.
What is a Coille?
A Coille was just a bit of a chain and a little, it was an old made out of a hoop of an old bucket or thing around their necks, and a bit of chain between, so the two were tied together. So they couldn't separate, so they wouldn't be real, because they would jump walls and travel everywhere. But it sustained them, it curtailed them a lot.
Yes, yeah.
So they couldn't move as much, so.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they got about a bit like.
Yeah. Used you milk the goats or
well, some used, they reckon that goat's milk was very good for asthma and different ailments, but not so much. But they also killed the kids going back at the time for meat for themselves.
Right.
They reckon the meat was beautiful.
Yeah.
As there were so many of them around that they did it, like they didn't want any male goats or any more male goats around, like, so they
killed
the kids, and the meat was lovely.
Yeah. So you've given me the names of some of the Boreens that went into the small fields. What about the fields themselves? Did many of the fields have names?
A lot of the fields had names, yeah, but a lot of them had the same name as the Boreens, because that's where the Boreens probably got the name from.
Right.
There was a lot of names. Gort Nu, as I referred to earlier on. Gort Nachra was the other one. Another one was an acre fields or whatever. Gort Tubber was where the well was like. There was the wetlands then, which were wet in the winter, and then they called them Eanach. Eanach.
Okay.
And then there was higher areas going towards the bank, they called them the Shadon. They were kind of sandy soil in them.
Say the word again.
Shadon.
Shadon.
They were known as the Shadon.
Okay.
They were fairly good for crops, all right. They had a fairly dry land, like. But there wasn't many in it. They were just equally divided out, sort of. They all had one each, or more or less. That's the way they divided that time to keep everybody kind of at a level, like.
Everybody with a bit
everybody had a lane and everybody had a shade on, more or less.
Right.
And everybody had the rocks, as we used to call them, the Craigie.
Right.
So they had your kind of portion of each, like.
Did you ever hear, Paddy, how that was divided up? How did that come about that each person had a portion of that?
Well, I imagine originally, like, it's whatever they rented from the landlords, like, it's whatever they could afford to pay. It probably was going back in the time. But later on, then, when the Land Commission moved in, they divided it fairly equally between them, like.
Right, yeah.
Which was about the 1950s, I think.
Yeah.
And at that time, they got the land in Runray as well, so they wasn't as badly off.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Because you know about the old, you know the word Rundale?
In Rundale, I do, yes.
So in Rundale, that was the way the land was, even in the landlord's time. It used to be divided up, so everybody got a portion of it.
That's right. Well, that's basically what it was here as well. Like same idea,
yeah. So it was an old system.
Some had more than others, like, but that was the way. But probably what you could afford at the time.
Yeah. Could you move further afield now on names? Because I know there's Boreens, for example.
Boreens, yeah. Well, there was no. Initially, there was no through road going through this village here, like. So they had to go through Boreens, as we call it now, and it went out at Blake's house and on the Annaghdown.
You come in
Lishinorn and straight through Boreens and out at Blake's, like we say, and straight on to the cemetery. So that was the easiest route, we'd say, for funerals and that. So hence they called it, I'd say, Boreens.
So the road that went out the other end onto the road to Annaghdown, that wasn't there at all?
Well, it broke parts. It was there in parts, but through the village here there was nothing. There was a section then again that led out to the main road the other side, but there were sections of it missing. The same going through Lishinorn and that.
Right.
Just in sections, because I suppose there was no need for it at the time. There was no vehicles or anything.
Yeah, true.
They didn't even have the horse and cart, I think, at the time, like.
Yeah.
So they were very poor.
Yeah.
People were very poor that.
Yeah. So Boreens, you had, I know from before you had the names of a few other little Boreens.
Yeah, the next one then, and that was Boreens, and since the field in there's Gortobui as well. They reckon that's where the yellow dog was, where they used to make the bricks long ago, and they sold them, brought them to the pier, and they were boated into Galway.
Oh, right.
There's a lot of buildings in Galway and other areas that are built with Annaghdown bricks.
Oh, is there?
But they were made in other areas around as well, not totally there. I think there was a lot of them made up in the bog, as we call the Portoch there in Iran, because there was a type of daub there as well that was suitable.
Oh, right, yeah.
As we found some of them now we were doing the well, and we have some of them in place in the situ in the well there as well. Just to hold on to them.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
We have, just to get them. We found them up in the bog. We were doing a bit of cleaning one time.
Okay. Is there another Boreen near the one the Dobwe? Is there another little Boreen there?
There is. There's a few of them, but they're in the Snorden now as well. They're leading on. The little narrow one, as it went to the right, is they used to call it Boreen Dach Query. There's two sheep, I suppose. It was very narrow on the section of it, and then it led on to Boreen Coog, they call it, which brings you out in the Snorden again.
And what Coog?
Coig, a whole of Mishar. Coig,
L5.
Yeah, and as Sheelam,
Yeah.
And as you go out, there's houses built there now at the moment, and all those Boreens have changed, like they're all cleared up now. They're not like they used to be.
Yeah.
Like most of it, you can go there by car now. And then there's another Boreen up by Frank Bydes, they call it Boreen Ganyef, which is a sandy road.
Okay. And would that have led into a sand pit or something?
No, but it's just, they must, well, when you say the sand pit, they probably did take sand out of areas, because when they were building houses, and that one time they just took the sand locally, wherever they got it, so they made little areas.
Yeah.
It's the same beside us. There's a place at the end of Boreens, they call it Crúchán Rua, and they used to get a lot of sand. That time it was a sort of red sand, I suppose that's why they call it Crúchán Rua. They took a lot of sand out. That was a type of red sand, like very fine sand.
Right. You mentioned the well. You were involved in reclaiming the well.
We were, yeah.
Can you tell me something about the well?
Yeah, well, the well was right beside our house. In fact, it was the corner of our garden where our old house was, and it supplied the whole village with water. Like they they came from the whole village. There was no other well that was used much in the village, like. So they came with buckets and the animals as well. They're passing because everybody had a few cows at the time. So they put the cows into pasture in the morning. So they were passing the well. They would water them, and the same coming back in the evening.
So did they give them a bucket of water, or how did they?
Yeah, they filled it in buckets.
Yeah.
Because we lived on the side beside the well there, and our house had always a load of buckets, and people would always come along and borrow the buckets to fill them and left them back again. Fairness, they were always left back again, like. Or anybody passing would call in for a chat or light a pipe or whatever.
Yeah.
But there was somebody always coming from the well, like. It was a great place for conversation.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you didn't defer to go to get your water anymore?
No, just a few metres, yards as we call them that time, yes.
And was the well maintained?
Oh, it was. The well was maintained, utterly maintained. It had to be because it was only supply of water, and it was cleaned out twice a year, like. And they'd use lime that emptied out as much as possible, and then the steps and all were cleaned and lime sprinkled on them to kill any germs or anything. That's the only thing they had that time, was the lime to kill the germs.
Yeah.
But they were meticulous about it, but they had to. Yeah. Because that's the only water they had to drink.
Yeah.
And for the washing and everything else, well, everybody had to wash their clothes and things that time, and they all had to get the water in the well.
Buckets of water and bring them home.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was all handwork, like.
Yeah, you were lucky to be beside it.
We were, because I know the people in the other end of the village and that had to travel, and sometimes they'd have a bike and they'd carry the buckets on the bike and then fill it, like. They had a longer journey. It was handy for us, all right. Even though we probably didn't appreciate it at the time.
Yeah.
But it was handy,
Yeah. About the Irish then, Paddy, did your parents speak Irish at home? Or?
Oh, they did, yeah.
They did?
They did, yeah. Just generally. And if they met the neighbours or anything, it was mainly Irish.
It was mainly Irish. And you, as a young person, when you were small,
Well, not so much. We wouldn't speak it that much, but we just hear them speaking it, like.
Yeah.
Because we were children going to school and that, and we weren't. But we used to like to listen to them, like, and they'd be talking. Mostly always speaking Irish when they'd meet one another.
Right, yeah.
Or when they come to visit. It was a lot of visiting houses at that time, and ours was one of them, like.
Okay.
And at night, people would come in and they'd be chatting away, like, and we'd be listening to them, and it'd be mostly all Irish, like.
Right. So only some houses were visiting houses?
No, that's all, yeah. There's some houses there.
And like in your house, could anybody arrive in any?
Oh, they could, yeah. They could, yeah. Because if there was a visiting house, anybody would come in that way. That's the way it was, like, you know.
Right. Well, and how,
people felt free to drop in, like.
Had you been a visiting house, say, in your grandparents' time?
Well, I presume. I don't know, but I presume, yes.
How a house became a visiting house, you know.
Because my grandparents died young, I wouldn't be sure, like. But I presume that it was a custom that was there traditionally, I presume. Yeah. Because the house would have been there it was a very old house, like, so we go back for a long time. Right,
yeah.
So that was a tradition, and I think in most villages, like. Yeah. There'd be certain houses people would call to.
And what would happen at night?
Not an awful lot, really, because there wasn't much. Sometimes in the winter they'd play cards or different things, but it's mostly conversations and chats. Like, there was no radio much at that time, or there was no television at all. Like when I was born, the electricity was just arriving here at that time. So before that, they didn't have any electricity.
Yeah. And were there stories?
Oh, there were all stories.
There were stories, yeah.
But mostly fairy stories and that. Shiogi, they used to be talking about always, and we were scared of them. We always believed in the Shiogi after that. They'd be telling you all those. But oftentimes they related to people who was out at night for different purposes and that, and people refer to them as Shiogi, but I don't know if they ever existed.
Yeah, but people really did believe them.
Oh, they did, yeah. They did. And if you were listening to those stories long enough too, you would believe in them.
Yeah, and you'd be afraid.
You would, yes. You would, and we'd go out at night or go somewhere, we'd be looking over our shoulders, thinking they were there, like. It took a long time to... And there were certain areas where they said the word in, and we'd be much more afraid in them areas.
Yeah. Well, I think we've covered a lot, Paddy. Is there anything else, since you've been talking now, is there anything else that comes to mind that you know, any of the old ways of the area?
Not much. The only other I would say thing they had mostly was the bonfire that they used to gather at, like the bonfire in June, St. John's, like. They gathered a lot, and they were so busy at the time, but like they'd still gather in that evening and have it like that.
And where was it?
It'd be, well, it was different areas from time to time. It was up behind our house at the beginning, and then was back at Goalies at the hill for a number of years. But as houses began to be built, you had to move around, so it was never, there was never a set place for it.
Right.
But everybody brought along some turf, and we used to go to the bog. There was a lot of bog day, as it's called, a bog oak, they call it now the bog. Loads of it when we were young, and we drew it all down and burned it. And the fires we did.
Yes.
It was easy to light fires at him because the area was open, like at 20 areas. But as time went on, it got very restricted. Like, so it's finished now near the practice.
Yeah.
Can't light fires like that anymore.
That's true. Yeah.
Because we went from the bog oak and that to tires later on, and that was a no-no as the time went by. Like, so all that disappeared then.
And people used to bring turf. And what used to do? Used to just chat at the bonfire?
Chat around mostly. Sometimes somebody might cook something or bring it out. Women have different things, like the older people, but for us we just rambled around.
Yeah. And any singing or music of any kind?
There was an odd time, I'd say, the John Farrer, the lad maybe gone, he might bring down the accordion and go playing for a while or that. But there wouldn't be much dancing, but there'd be a bit of music.
Yeah, so the bonfire. And
it was a great tradition.
I suppose it was like would you have had St Patrick's Day, St Bridget's Day? Were they ever celebrated?
Not so much that time. No. It's later on. They've become really commercial later on. But in that time there wasn't that much about them. The holy days were days for church. Religion was very strong that time, so everybody went to church on Sundays and holy days. So they really observed them because they didn't work on them days.
So, Paddy, you were telling me about the Sheadon and the bog. So could you elaborate a little bit about what was actually done in those areas?
Well, the Sheadon was the land between the rocks, which are the Creganey and the bog, more or less. It was a raised sandy soil, like ideal for growing crops and that, and relatively dry, sandy soil. So a lot of the crops were grown. They get ideal for sowing potatoes and root crops and that, and corn as well. So they had to rotate their crops from different areas, like we say the seed spuds. So they transferred the seed from different areas, and they would grow grand again for a few years, but they had to keep moving them around or swap with the neighbours or whatever. To get, they wouldn't grow twice in the same area, in the same seed,
And did people? So obviously you could save the potatoes. Did people save the grain as well?
Oh, the grain would be similar, yes. The same. You'd swap the seed. Some people swap the seed with the neighbours or whatever. You wouldn't sow the same seed back in the same area again,
And how was the harvesting done?
The harvesting done, well, originally going back, and they did it with the hook, but that was before my time. But I saw it done. But the scythe then was, when I was very young, they cut it with the scythe, and then the horses and the mow machine came before the reaper and binder. And the same with the hay, it was cut with a scythe back then as well. All saved by hand,
Hard work. Hard
work and weather.
Yeah.
You had to get the weather for it,
Yeah. So we talked about the land, the Sheadon. And you told me that everybody had a portion of it, and that you thought that the division must have happened a long time ago.
Oh, it would, back here, because everybody had to have a certain division that they could sow crops and that, and they had to lay it in for the cows and that for pasture. And then the rocks was very dry land, which was ideal for cattle and that in the winter time and that. But it was very dry in the summer, as there was no running water in that time.
And the Lena, where
the Lena would be fairly wet land, more or less. It would be towards the bog, between the Sheadon and the bog.
Right.
But there would be water there, so they wouldn't, the cows and that maybe would have a drink. Some people had a hole in it that would hold water or whatever. Or the cows, when they'd be going through the bog, they would get a drink anyway, so they'd be okay.
Okay. And was there grazing on the Lena? Could cows?
Oh, the grazing was quite good,
Yeah.
Yeah, they'd usually have them in the Lena during the day, and then probably during the summer when they wouldn't be housing them at night, they would put them to the rocks of the Creganey, which was dry for them to lie and have the grass.
I know the land was poor, but there was a great variety of types of land.
There was. Everything was rotated, and you had to do it that way.
And Rinray, you talked about that before.
Rinray was the land they got, was part of the Blake estate, which was a big improvement from what they had. Like it was fairly large fields and good land, like, so they could sow beet, and the beet came in that time, and it was everybody sowed a bit of beet in, so they had a bit of land to use, like.
Yeah.
And that's where they made a few bob that time. There was no money out of other crops much that time, but the beet, there was always a few bob for the Christmas.
And then the bog.
Oh, the bog was the centre of everything one time. They had so many things grew on the bog that they could use around the farm, like. But the main thing was the turf. Like.
Yeah.
They saved the turf from the fire. But then they had sedge and reeds and that they used for thatching. And the scraws they cut for covering the potatoes, or even use it in the roofs originally under the thatch, like, as well. It had a lot of uses, like. So they covered the spuds for the winter and all that with those things as well, if they didn't have enough straw, like, because they used a lot of straw for bedding that time.
Ah, right, yeah.
So they wouldn't, sometimes they could run out of it, it wouldn't be as plentiful, like, because all the animals were housed. So they used the straw and the bedding for them.
Yeah. They were housed in winter time?
In winter time, yes.
And would they be let out during the day in winter time?
Oh, they would, yeah.
Oh,
they
yeah.
would be let out during the day, yeah.
Yeah.
But just, they would have a lot of dung, what they used to cow dung that time, and that for fertiliser. Well, they needed as well for the land, like, so. They got that from the animals.
So back to the bog. So what time of year would you start on the bog?
Well, they'd be cutting the turf from maybe April onwards, like, depending on the year, like. But if you got a good year, they'd be cutting from April onwards and saving the turf, like. Anything else they needed, if they were stuck, they would use it, like, say, the sedge and the reeds and that for thatching.
Did everybody have a specific portion of it?
Everybody had a specific portion,
yeah.
They cut that, and some wood was better than others, but that's the way. It depends how high or low it was in the area, like. It was easier to save turf in the higher ground, but sometimes the quality mightn't be as good.
And could you get through? How could you get through the bog?
You could get through. It was easy to get through that time. There was little, we'd say, pathways through it and that. You could. Everybody went through the bog that time, like.
And would there be shortcuts through the bog?
Oh, they would, yeah. Especially particularly up in Boreens, between Barana and Woodpark, or that, like, the people could come from Barana. They used it as a path when they were going to mass and then a down thing, which would take a lot out of their journey, like.
Yeah. Is that path still there? Could you walk?
It is, but it's hard to identify now because it's sort of overgrown, like. But it's still there, yes. It's a ridge of high ground, like.
Yeah.
So it was never cut, like, there was never turf cutting it or anything. So it's be hard to identify now, but it's still there, like.
Yeah. So you said people used to come from Barana to go to mass.
Mass.
So you had a church in the.
The church was in our village as well, down towards, yeah. I had a church, and the school is also in the village, and we had a shop as well at the time.
Yeah, so you were well catered for.
Well, we were, I suppose.
Yeah. I think we did. There was something else. The animals that you used to keep, the pigs.
Pigs, yeah, the pigs were a big thing because every couple of months, like, they had to turn over a few bob, like.
Every couple of months.
We have about 3 months, every 3 months or so.
So how many litters would the...
Well, you see, some people had sows and they would have a couple of litters a year, but others then just bought bonhams, as they call them, and they reared them to pigs. Like, bonham might be a few weeks old when they buy them, like, and then they rear them. Like, not everybody had a sow, but most people had pigs.
Right.
So they fattened the pigs, like we say, and they sold them on.
And did they sell... What size were they when they sell them? Did they sell bonhams as well as adult pigs?
No, to be adults, like, they were sold for bacon, like, yeah. So they had to be a certain weight. Like, if they were over the weight, the money would be less, and if they were underweight, it would be the same. So they kind of judged when they were to bring them, like.
Yeah.
So they got the best price for them, like.
Yeah. And where you used to bring them to?
Yeah, Corbett and Clonboo.
And what would happen there?
Well, Corbett, there was a man from Hetford, Corbett, I forget his first name, Todd Corbett, they used to call him, and he would collect there every Wednesday. Okay. People would bring the pigs and they would be weighed there. There was a scale there in Corbett. They would weigh the pigs and they would get paid accordingly. If they were over the weight, they would be reduced slightly, and if they were underweight. So they tried to have them at the ideal weight, about 14 stone or so.
14 stone. And they used to have to be walked from here to...
They'd be all walked at that time, yes. There was no transport, there was no cars.
Yeah.
And they would be nearly judging that as well, because during the walk they would probably lose a certain amount of weight, like.
Yeah.
so that they would know that, like.
Yeah, so that was a great skill. That
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it was. The women in particular had that skill down to a fine art, like they knew,
Yeah.
they knew the time to bring them when the time was right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were so used to doing it. Like.
Yes, and every penny was important.
It was really important.
Yeah. Is there anything else about the farming life?
Well, they had also hens. Like hens was the main part of their income as well that time, because it was more or less bartering. They would have so many score of eggs to go to the travelling shop, and they would get their groceries then, whatever they needed against that. Like, so there wouldn't be very little money changing hands.
And would like people used to buy in the Bonhams, would they buy the chickens as well, the chicks?
They would, the old chicks. They used to come on the bus that and they'd order them place, and maybe 2 dozen, 25 they'd be in a box, like 2 dozen or so, and they'd collect them at usually the post office in Corndulla, and they would rear them from there. But oftentimes there could be some casualties along the way, like they'd lose some of them, but they would, they'd try and rear them then. Yeah. The cocks, they said they would kill for the meat, and if there was the pullets, then they would use for eggs. For eggs. Yeah. And I suppose when they got old, they'd be killed as well. They would, yeah, but when they got old, they wouldn't be as lucrative that time for the meat, but they would, yeah. Were there many foxes around that? There was full of them, because hence the craggy near the rocks, there was full of foxes, yes. Oh, they had plenty of hiding places. But they would be very secure, like they'd have them housed in the evening. Like the hens were so used to it, they would go to bed early in the evening. Like, and they just close them up. They'd be safe. They would, yeah. I know that your people spoke Irish, Paddy, and Irish was spoken in the village. I'm just wondering, say in relation to the bog, did you use the Irish terms for what you did on the bog? Yeah, a lot of them would be Irish terms, yes. Do you remember them? It depends what you'll be doing, yeah, but a lot of them would be Irish terms, like we'd say the turf, the moan, and Fasloch, and the Eanach, and that, the different areas of the bog and that. Well, I don't know what they are. And the Eanach would be the raised areas, like, and the Fasloch would be the lower areas and that, which be hard to save turf in the Fasloch. It's the lower areas, they'll bring it out to a higher area up in the Eanach, like where you're dry in that. And they had a lot of terms, like, it was all Irish terms that time. So in English, the term bog hole, did you have an Irish term for that? Just Pulporta. Pulporta, yeah. Pulporta. Yeah. And in English, so what I'd have experienced, footing the turf and clamping the turf, was there the first stage where you'd make the small stands? Well, I've never heard much in Irish that they used to always say footing. Oh, did they? Okay, so there was yeah. But footing, and ray footing, that's what you used to call the first time there. Yeah. And then they would make the Irish term like groigines and dúhans, them were the Irish terms for them, alright? Yeah. Which would be small little piles, and then the dúhan would be a bigger one if they couldn't bring it home or if the weather wasn't that good. They'd into the dúhan, and then a reek, groig, moan, was the Irish for the reek. Like they'd maybe sometimes have to make that in the bog if the weather was bad, but more often than not they would be able to take it home before that. Like. All right. And if they left it on the bog, would it ever be brought home, or would people have to just go and collect the turf? Well, that could be, but if they were going to leave in the bog, they would make it into a reek. They would make sure to be safe, because if you didn't treat it properly, like it would just go into dust and that, like the weather would take its toll on it. So people the weather had a huge impact on. Well, it had, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything else about the farming life? Well, just that everything was done by hand, like, matter of the crops, everything was done by hand. The corn was cut with the scythe and into sheaves and stokes and stacks, as they call them, and that. And the same with the hay, like, it had to be all saved by hand and that. All forms of it, same way with the pigs, they had to be fed with the spuds and they'd be mashed for them, and everything was by hand. There was nothing easy that time. Like. What would you talk through the grain, say, was it wheat? What did you grow? Wheat? Well, wheat would be mainly for the straw, for the thatch, mainly, or they'd have for coshkeen, or that would be, they'd make meal of it. But the oats and barley as well, like for oats and barley. Yeah, so the feed stuff for animal feeds more or less, and then the straw was for bedding. because the barley and the straw would be much sharper, like it wouldn't be any use for thatching or anything.
All right, and oat straw.
Oat and straw would be a bit better, but it tended to lodge in that it wasn't as good, like, and it wouldn't last the same. But most of the straws that was used for bedding. But they needed to sow the corn as well to get the rotation, like for the root crops, like,
yes,
so they had to keep them.
It was part of the important part of the
Rotation, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So you said everything was done by hand. So okay, the straw, or the, what would you call it? The barley was cut with the side.
Cut by the side,
and
yeah.
then what was the next stage?
Well, they tied it into sheaves, like, and then they made stooks of it. Stooks on the field, and they had to be left there until they had time to collect them. And if the weather was very bad, they made what they call hand stacks of them in the field, so that save it, like.
What was a hand stack?
It's just a little stack, like it's much bigger than a stook, like, but just like a small stack, like, but just to preserve it, like, you know. But that would be rare, just if the weather was very bad.
Yeah.
They couldn't save it, but normally it was just brought in a few days or a week, like, if they could.
Brought back to the
haggart.
The haggart.
They called the haggart, and then they made a big stack of it.
And what was the big stack resting on?
Acne. Mostly it was acne. They just cut it in the bog as well. That was part of the thing in the bog. They put it at the base because so the rats wouldn't get at the corn, because the rats loved the stacks of corn. So they wouldn't get in at the base then because of the thorns and the acne, furs.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And with quite a thick layer of...
Oh, they would, yeah, cut it maybe 6 inches to a foot underneath, like.
Good idea.
It was, yeah, it was a good idea at the time. Well, they learned the hard way, I presume.
Yeah, yeah. And the big stack built up. And then how was the grain removed from it?
Well, the thrasher, there was a thrasher in my time now that I never saw before. They used to hand slash it one time before, right, with flails and that, but I never saw that. But there was a thrasher coming, and the thrasher would go around the village, and all the neighbours would help. Like, it was a big day when the thrasher would come.
Yeah.
Everybody would help, and it'd be all the young ones following the rats, and a whole lot of great day, and everybody would be brought in for a meal, and that it was one of the big days in the village, like when the day of the thrasher.
Would the thrasher do different people's work on the same day? Would they go around?
Oh, they would, yeah, they would, yeah. But they usually, we'd say, come into a village, they do all the village, we'd say, when they be there, like, then go on to the next village. People would maybe hold back a stack or something they need later, but they would trash the main crop, like.
Yeah. Why would they hold back?
Well, they may need it for later or whatever. They mightn't trash it all together. Well, they mightn't have a place to store it either, like, wasn't as simple as it, because it was hard enough to store grain that time, because all they had is canvas bags, and they didn't have the facility to store it, and the rats would play havoc with it as well, like, so they couldn't be holding a whole load of grain together, like.
Right.
So it was
safer in the stack?
It was safer in the stack,
okay, yeah. And you said some if there was wheat sown, that could be used for coshking. Would you bring it to the mill? Or
you bring it to the mill, that one, yeah, that was brought to the mill. Yeah, there was a mill close by, Fiore's mill in Kilroe.
Yeah.
And everybody around here used that mill, like. That was there going back for a long time. It was Alcorns before that.
Yeah.
So they would bring it to the mill. Sure, the mill was the busiest place there was that time.
Yeah, yeah. What else used the mill do for the farmers?
Well, they would crush or roll corn or whatever for the animals as well. Like, you didn't normally feed us, other than the horses. You didn't feed whole grain to the animals, like. So they brought it and rolled it or crushed it or whatever, like, for them.
Right.
And then put it through the feed, like, whatever.
Okay. And which animals got that grain?
Well, the few cattle or the cows, so that they had to be fed with the grain, like, with some turnips as well and mangels and whatever. And the horse then got usually the oats.
Was all the oats kept for the horse?
The horse was, yeah. Well, not at all maybe, but they always had enough for the horse, because the horse had to be fed.
Yeah.
The horse did all the hard work.
Yeah, yeah. Did people keep any of the oats for themselves? Like, was oats ever milled for use for porridge or anything like that?
No, not really, no, not much. No, they used to make some wholemeal, all right, out of it, but it'd be only a small amount, like oatmeal.
Yeah.
So they would do some, but not enough.
Yeah. So it was mainly for the horses.
It was, yeah, for the animals.
Yeah. Did you have your own horse?
We did, yeah.
You did.
Yeah, most people had a horse, but just in this area, not many could afford to have two horses, like. For ploughing, if you had much ploughing, right, you need 2 horses, but most farms here, they just had the 1 horse. So sometimes neighbours went in co, as they used to call it, co with one another,
Yeah.
where one would borrow the horse when they'd be ploughing, and the same, the other neighbour would get the horse again the next day or whatever, like, just maybe for ploughing or whatever.
Yeah. Was ploughing the main?
Ploughing was the main. Yeah, well, every field had a plough, and some people like ploughed it twice. It depends on the field. Like, there was no weed killers or anything that time, so all weeding had to be done by hand. So the land had to be well tilled. Like.
So ploughing it twice had to deal with some of the weeds.
Well, it does. Yeah, some people that ploughed maybe early on, turn it down, like, so that the frost or whatever, like, would kill a lot of the roots and that, and then later on they ploughed again, like.
To get it ready for the crop.
To get ready for the crop, yeah.
Yeah.
Depending on the year and how dry it was, like. Unless it was fairly dry, they couldn't plough, like.
Anything else about the work? I mean, I know that there was endless work for people.
Endless work is right, sure. There was no end to it, like. Everything had to be done by hand. The slits, as I said, the spuds, the potatoes had to be cut into slits, like, and so on. They had to be all spread by hand and covered by hand most cases, because they didn't want the horse to walk over them, like. Some horses was very good at it, all right, but other horses you couldn't, like, because they would walk on the slits and that, like, so a lot of them were done by hand.
Right. So it was opened up with the plough, but then everything else after that was done by hand.
By hand mostly, yeah.
Planting the potatoes, yeah. What fertiliser was used on the potatoes? Well,
they used to get their own fertiliser. They used to mix it themselves. There was potash, ammonia and sulphur. So, sulphur, as I used to call it, yeah, sulphur, potash and ammonia. And they had their own mixtures. Everybody kind of varied a bit, like. They had certain mixtures. They had it going back to years, like, and they mixed their own mixture, like.
Okay. And would they use manure as well?
Well, there was the farmyard manure.
Farmyard manure.
That would be always, but they would sow the spuds first, like, the potatoes would be sown, and then just before they come up, you would put the farmyard manure, and then they would close, what they used to call close them in again, then, like, make drills again, more or less, just between the drills.
By hand?
No, but the horse
and
plough,
yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then they would knock the drills, like, and...
knock the drills for harvesting the potatoes?
No, just for the future, so they could they'd scuffle them then again later on, just to get rid of the weeds. So they had to keep one through the land all the time. Other than that, the weeds would take control, like.
Right.
They'd scuffle them then again, and then they would run the plough again in them, like. Just to keep the weeds down, like. It was all
was all that before the growth started?
Well, during the growth as well, like, they had to be, like, and some of them had to be hand weeded as well, because there was no sprays or anything, like. So they have to keep the weeds at bay, like. Like the carrochera was a big weed that time, and it used to grow rampant in the potatoes, like. Right. It was hard to keep that under control.
Right.
And if you let it out of control, you'd have to cut it down with a hook, a reaping hook or something.
Right. So what was the most labour-intensive aspect of it all, Paddy, would you say?
Well, I suppose the weeding and everything, because they used to weed them, like, by hand. Weeding for everything, the beet and everything had to be weeded, like, so that was the hardest. I think, you had to go down on your knees and go through. That was the hardest work of the lot, like.
Yeah. No weed killers. No,
there was no weed killers at the time, and then the farmyard manure as well. It spread the weeds as well, like. The weeds grew on that, like.
Yeah.